thank you for being here today and to everyone watching from afar. My name is Stacey Oakes. I'm an organizer with 350 Seattle, and I've lived along the Salish Sea my entire life. To start the press conference, we first welcome David Kipnis, Seattle Cruise Control member, who's been asked to speak on behalf of the Duwamish tribe, the first peoples of these lands and waters, who have, along with other Coast Salish peoples, have cared for the Salish Sea since time immemorial and continue to do so today.
So important that everybody's here today on this launching of Catastrophe. I want to acknowledge that as we're on this land, the exact land that we're standing on right now, this is considered a very important site in the Duwamish people. This is a site where they, as you can imagine, if you close your eyes and imagine what this was like 50 years ago and more, the wildlife that was here, this was a hunting ground for them, a place where they used for subsistence. So they are aware of our presence here today. They have given permission for us to be here today, and they are in solidarity with our concerns about the dire need of environmental awareness and protection of the Salish Sea. The Duwamish Nation supports responsible tourism that does not harm the environment. These boats are not an example of that. The Duwamish people have showed us through their cultural past how to care for the land, and they've led the way on how to fix problems created by placing profit over people. The Duwamish people have done all this, but yet they need to struggle and insist to be recognized by the federal government. And in fact, locally, they struggle and they insist on using their lands occupied by the Port of Seattle for their cultural practices. The Duwamish support our effort to insist on protecting and restoring the Salish Sea, and we can also assist them. You can support the Duwamish efforts to become recognized by our federal government, and you can do it right now by taking out your phone. If you take out your phone right now and Google "Stand with the Duwamish," do that right now. And when you find that, when you go onto that site, Duwamish is spelled D-U-W-A-M-I-S-H, Stand with the Duwamish. And on that website, you'll find a place to support their recognition by our federal government of their nation. Thank you so much again for being here. Support the Duwamish.
Thank you so much, David, and also deep gratitude to the Duwamish people. Our next speaker, Rachel McDonald, is going to share with us about the impacts of massive cruise ships to our sacred waters and the marine life that are currently struggling to survive. Rachel is an avid kayaker and a former 350 Seattle board member.
Thank you everyone for being here today. When I kayak through our waters, I'm humbled and amazed by the beauty of this place that we call home. I've seen great blue herons hunting for fish and juvenile bald eagles calling for food from their parents. I've enjoyed the antics of sea lions kayaking near Golden Gardens, and once in a great while, I've spotted orca off of Alki. The place we live in is magical. I love it, and I know that you all do too. Commissioners of the Port of Seattle, we rely on you to steward this precious resource and protect it wisely. But the cruise companies who park their massive vessels in our ports don't love this place like you or I do. Instead, they belch toxic emissions without regard for our neighbors. Cruises burn the dirtiest fuels, not for essential services, but for luxury. And to avoid taxes, labor protections, and environmental regulations, nearly all cruise ships fly foreign flags. The Environmental Protection Agency estimates that a 3,000-person cruise ship generates 150,000 gallons of sewage a week, enough to fill 10 backyard pools. This adds up to more than 1 billion gallons of sewage a year for the industry. And once cruise ships are out of protected waters, it's common practice for them to dump trash, human waste, and engine waste straight into the ocean. In addition, noise pollution makes it difficult for marine mammals to navigate, including our endangered orcas. As you can imagine, all this toxic soup makes it difficult for orcas to reproduce. Simply put, cruise companies offshore their profits and import pollution. Moreover, the cruise industry exploits workers. When the COVID-19 pandemic was spreading across the globe, they irresponsibly set sail, only to leave thousands of workers stranded at sea, away from their families, without pay, and with some workers even taking their own lives out of desperation. If you truly care about workers, if you truly care about the health of both people and planet, if you truly love our Salish Sea, I implore you, port commissioners, to stop these luxury cruises from restarting. Don't roll out a red carpet for these cruise companies who could care less about our communities. Thank you.
Rachel, thank you so much for your words and for helping to speak for those that cannot speak for themselves. One thing I hope we can think about is, what is a coastal port without healthy waters? How long can that actually thrive? And as we poison our waters, we are also poisoning ourselves. The smokestack emissions from these ships impact onboard workers, passengers, coastline communities along their route, and destination communities where ships can idle for days. We are joined today by Dr. Anne-Marie Dooley with Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility to talk more about health.
My name is Anne-Marie Dooley. I'm a doctor and a member of Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility. 3 weeks ago in this area, the temperature exceeded 108 degrees Fahrenheit. Hugely hot temperatures. Scores of people ended up dead, and thousands ended up in area hospitals. My colleague described the Swedish ER as something similar to his native Jordan after 4 suicide bombings. It was a public health emergency, and the struggle in the hospitals continued for weeks. Dangerous climate change is here already, and we have to decide what we're going to do about it. We can choose to continue to increase cruise ships and terminals, increasing carbon and emissions in our air. We can continue to allow cruise ship and marine pollution that in its cleanest form causes 400,000 deaths and 6 million new cases of asthma globally every year. We can choose to allow black carbon combine with ozone from hot days to make our air dangerously difficult to breathe. Or we can choose something different. Now, we all want, after the COVID pandemic, to go back to normal. I, as a doctor, want this too. But there was no normal to begin with. It wasn't a normal economy that allowed pollution from cruise ships as just a normal part of business, as implied by one of our port commissioners in the Seattle Times yesterday. We cannot go back to the old ways, the bad ways, where we put people and public health last, where the business of business is simply doing business, accepting the chronic disease and deaths that follow, and where we deny responsibility for the emissions and deaths that result from cruise ships, saying that they're just a small part of a global problem. We need a new way, a fair way, and a more sustainable economy where we ask first, what sort of world and city do we want, not what pollution we can accept and then settle for less. Part of the problem is we have a lot of knowledge, but we're not acting on this knowledge. I'm asking for action from neighbors, friends, family, and our elected officials. Action. None of us can do this alone, and none of us should have to bring loved ones to the hospital on a hot day with extreme temperatures. That should never happen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dooley. It's painfully ironic to see the Port of Seattle's theme for the 2021 season be called Cruise Healthy. Along with the cruise industry's practices being unhealthy for our waters, marine life, and communities, we know they're horrendously unhealthy for the climate. Using information from the 2019 Seattle to Alaska cruise season, we are able to determine that the greenhouse gas impact of that 6-month season of cruise sailings and their associated airline flights is equal to about 1/3 of the city of Seattle's emissions for the entire year. This kind of impact from non-essential leisure activity, while we face the unprecedented danger of climate collapse in our lifetime, is inexcusable. We owe better to our children. They are going to see worse and more frequent deadly heat waves and droughts, more intense forest fires, more global famine, more species pass into extinction. We are at the moment where we need to care about the big picture and make decisions that prioritize health, justice, and life. Along with worsening the climate crisis, continuing to support fossil fuel-intensive industries also means being complicit in the harms and injustices associated with fracking, with pipelines running through indigenous lands like we see happening in Minnesota with Line 3 and on the Standing Rock Reservation, with toxic refineries and distribution hubs, such as we have just south of us on the ancestral tide flats of the Puyallup tribe, known today as the Port of Tacoma. That place was once a thriving estuary full of life that is now full of toxic Superfund sites and some of the most unhealthy air in the country. Our next speaker is Melissa Knott, an Extinction Rebellion Tacoma representative and state committee member for the 29th Legislative District Democrats.
Good afternoon. Cruise ships use a heavy fossil fuel oil that is dense, like black peanut butter, and must be mixed with another fuel such as diesel to power their ships. Heavy fuel oil goes by many different names, such as fuel oil, marine fuel, furnace oil, and bunker fuel. Although there are alternatives to bunker fuel, cruise ships use this extremely toxic fuel because it is cheap. Bunker fuel, which is the dirtiest fossil fuel around, sells for around 50 cents a gallon. In 2018, Carnival Cruise Line consumed 3.3 million metric tons of this fuel that has an average sulfur content of about 2.5%. The United Nations International Maritime Organization capped sulfur emissions released into the open sea air at 0.5% in 2020. Instead of moving to the more expensive low sulfur fuel, most cruise lines have opted to fit their ships with scrubbers, which take the sulfur out of the ship's emissions that go into our air, only to turn around and release it through discharge into our ocean waters, which in turn acidifies those waters. Or they're switching to LNG fossil fuel. Carnival Cruise Line already has 2 ships equipped with LNG fuel. The Mardi Gras, which is scheduled to set sail in Port Canaveral, Florida sometime this year, and the Carnival Celebration, which will leave Port Miami in 2022. Carnival Cruise Line will add another 9 LNG ships by 2025. LNG is presented to the people as a cleaner fossil fuel and a bridge off of dirty bunker fuel to a greener future. On the surface, this may seem like a logical step. But when you move past the simplicity of the message that it burns cleaner and dive a little deeper, you start to realize the true impact on our world as a whole. The benefit does not outweigh the costs. Extracting gas from the earth is an extremely toxic process. The impact it has on our planet, the wildlife, and the surrounding communities is devastating. The air pollution, loss of natural habitat, and increased earthquakes around LNG sites are only the beginning. The individuals who live in communities near these sites also have to deal with toxic soil and water, to the point to where some homes can turn on their tap and light the water on fire. Due to the high methane levels, in the groundwater, studies have shown an increase of infant leukemia in babies born near LNG facilities. Storage sites such as the newly constructed LNG facility on sovereign land at the Port of Tacoma, where they plan to store 8 million gallons of liquid fracked gas, have a blast zone of 3 miles, where everything will turn into ashes within a 3-mile radius of the facility. if the facility were to blow up, and an evacuation zone of 12 miles. The biggest issue with LNG pertaining to climate change is the main ingredient, methane. Methane is a more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. Methane leaks are inevitable in the extraction, storage, and burning of fracked gas. Just because the end product burns cleaner than the dirtiest and cheapest fuel currently used by the industry does not automatically make it more environmentally friendly. The cruise ship industry as it stands is unethical and harmful, and we must put our people and planet over profits. It is time to envision a cruise-free Salish Sea. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa, for helping bring more awareness to the human impacts of fossil fuel use. Puget Sound Energy's controversial and toxic LNG facility on the edge of the Puyallup Reservation, currently being challenged in court, was built primarily for maritime fuel distribution. Another reminder that we need to care about the full scope of our actions and communities impacted, not just what happens right here in our backyard. And the same is true when we talk about jobs. The reality is many of the jobs supported by the cruise industry are not family wage jobs. Here in Seattle, we're talking about hotel hospitality workers and Uber drivers as some examples, but the working conditions and pay of many of the onboard workers from Eastern Europe, Asia, and South America are absolutely deplorable. Here to share more is longtime labor advocate Bob Barnes.
Which one is that's the one, there we go. Okay. Hi y'all, I am Bob. I'm not speaking officially for organized labor because, as probably everybody knows, it is a house divided on this issue. So I'm just going to state some facts, and hopefully more and more people are going to recognize them as facts. The Serenade by the Sea is this big box ship that's out here behind me. It's flying under the flag of the Bahamas. So maritime law allows ships to fly what they call flags of convenience, which means that the ship owners can pick any country in the world to register their ship in, and then it's a citizen of that country, basically. So the ship, the passengers, and the crew all fall under the jurisdiction of whatever laws are applicable in the country whose flag the ship is sailing under. And that includes labor law. There's a reason that countries such as the Bahamas are a favorite of the cruise ship industry. Because labor laws in the Bahamas allow for very, very little worker protection. The vast majority of cruise ship workers come from countries that have weak and laxly enforced labor laws, similar to the laws operating under the favorite flag of convenience countries that the shipping industry uses. Only about 5% of cruise ship seafarers are U.S. citizens. Labor costs are approximately 5 times higher for vessels flying the U.S. flag than those flying the flags of convenience, all of which makes it real easy for the cruise ship companies to get away with forcing workers to work 70 to 90 hours a week for months straight with no overtime pay for wages as low as $500. You average that out, it's about $1.80 an hour. That's just a tad below the worst minimum wage, even in the U.S. Healthcare is also a major issue, particularly for those seafarers working with the lowest paid and most dangerous jobs. It's not uncommon for those workers to be misdiagnosed and to receive inadequate medical care and to face discipline if they even report an accident or an industry. And as an object lesson to how seafarers are treated on these cruise ships, as Rachel said earlier, there were tens of thousands of crew members who were trapped for months on these ships in the early days of the pandemic with no pay. During this same time period, many of the corporate executives of these cruise ship companies were receiving literally millions of dollars in bonuses. So the list of what's wrong with these cruise ships is long. People have been speaking to them. The environmental devastation that they're bringing to the world is worse than many other industries. And that's becoming more obvious by the day. But let's never forget the toll this industry takes on the people working hard to make these cruises the exciting and enjoyable thing that the companies claim them to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. And thank you so much to all of our speakers here today. As you've all heard, the reasons to envision a cruise-free Salish Sea are many, and they are too important to ignore. We hope you can all join us in urging the Port of Seattle to begin working on a transition away from polluting cruise ships and their toxic business practices. And at this time, we can go ahead and field any questions from the media if there are any. All right, we must have hit all the good information to not have any questions. Great job, speakers. Let's give everybody a round of applause. And then also, if we can just take a moment to raise our hands again to our hosts, the Duwamish people. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming.